What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 364. Coming hot off the heels of our top films of 2022. We're getting into this new episode. My name is Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show. And as always, I'm joined by
Ron
and John.
How you guys doing?
Glad to be over with the list, man. It was stressing me out for weeks at a time, and I'm glad I feel like we've just
we turned the page.
Detoxed. We turned the page. We detoxed. We broke up with that toxic significant other that's kind of sitting in the winds. We got rid of that mother.
Except this was like a significant other that we loved.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed, and we thought of our 10 favorite things about them, and then we said, "Get out of here."
Oh, those are the most toxic.
The people who you like so much.
You like so much, but they are like
it's dangerous.
Yeah.
For the way they make us feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if listeners are just hopping on for whatever reason, because of this episode, we're referring to our best of the year list, which we just did for 2022. So that's our last episode, and it was, it definitely left me feeling like. I mean, it's that weird anxiety just about have you seen enough to make a good list?
Yeah.
Then realizing you have, and then it relaxes a little bit. And I'm still going to let a few things I didn't see kind of trickle through, and hopefully, I might rethink things. I wondered one day, would you guys like to go back and do an episode where we look at all of our top tens, and if we want to bump something out or slot something in for reasons things have changed, like the original still stands, but would you want to create like the asterisk version just to see how we feel about some of our picks from maybe 9 or 10 years ago?
Yeah,
that'd be fun.
And we should. Fun. I want to call this one the snap. Like since COVID happened, it was kind of like the snap in the Marvel universe. Like we missed that part too. So maybe we could rattle off some movies that we may have missed. You kind of suggested that as well, like offline.
Yeah.
That we just
make a list for those years and rattle them off.
Just a couple of movies. Yeah, we don't have to like get in depth of why we were loving them, but people will feel the emotion through the names of the movies.
And if it's a movie that we somehow didn't talk about that we should have, that will be a nice way for it to come up. Do you know what I mean? If for some reason we're realizing, we never talked about this or that. So,
So
what do we have on tap this week, Steve?
Well, thankfully we're finally getting around to the next discussion for our required viewing segment. Ronald picked, a classic, an OG, The Godfather.
Yeah.
We've had plenty of time to watch this, but we're going to get into that in a moment. But and remind me real quick, you didn't see it before, right? You said you hadn't seen it, right? Okay, this is one of those. This is one of those
first 5 minutes or so every time. I've never seen.
Right.
Even in between scenes, the closest I've ever seen is Naked Gun 33 and a Third, which had portions of that movie in it. Like,
sure.
Yes.
Yeah. I was the Simpsons writers joked that they had parodied, they felt every moment of Citizen Kane at a certain point, that almost every shot in Citizen Kane had been parodied on The Simpsons. I mean, they were exaggerating, but they kind of meant you could almost edit together a version of Citizen Kane from all the Simpsons references to that movie. And I don't think that's true of The Simpsons and The Godfather, but I do think that pop culture and The Godfather have such a love affair that you could feel like every other line is something you've heard recontextualized or satirized or just used or paid homage to or quoted. I mean, it is one of those crazy movies in that way, that every little piece of it has become an iconic thing. But I wonder, I can't wait to hear what your impression was of watching it for the first time in 2023. I was about to say 2022, but it's dead wrong, brother.
It's funny you say that. There's a movie. Have you seen that movie that took the pieces of fan clips of remakes of RoboCop? They pieced them together to make a full movie.
I've heard of that, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
It is the strangest movie. It's so good. And I bet somebody could actually do that for The God. That would be so cool if somebody did that for The Godfather and like made this amalgam of these clips throughout history
of just everything that's parodied or referenced a shot you could definitely put together like a Cliff Notes version of The Godfather. Did we have any business we wanted to get to before we dive into this? A movie I'm prepared to say is a classic film.
Yeah, it's a hot take there.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't come in so hot like here at the
spoiler alert. I don't know. I don't think there's any big news. I mean, We got a couple new
No.
trailers, a new Ant-Man trailer.
Yeah.
New trailer for third season of Mandalorian.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
I
it just
need to
came out
watch that.
yesterday, I think afternoon
Okay.
it dropped. But in most cases, I mean, at least for me, those things, I'm at the same level I'm at already. You know, with both, it's like, yeah, I want to check them out. I want to see
Well,
them.
with
Neither one of them really, like, I would say, wowed me with anything special. But
as far as
I
the
mean,
trailers themselves,
yeah, the
you mean?
trailers themselves.
I feel like the first Ant-Man trailer is better. It's got that Elton John edit or whatever the dub
Makes
of
me
that.
so sad for
That's
some
so
reason.
emotional and so potent, and
Yeah.
it blends into what seems almost like a sound effect or sound design thing for Kang. You know, this kind of weird thing. And the new trailer, I would just say, is noteworthy just because it's that trailer they put out closer to the movie that gives you more of the story.
Yeah.
And I like the stories. That's one of the things we've talked about with Spider-Man. A good Spider-Man story is usually Peter making some kind of mistake. This looks like that's what's going to happen with Ant-Man and Kang, is that he's going to make a deal with Kang and then discover he can't, and then that's going to be a thing. So I'm intrigued by that. But yeah, I agree with you, Steve. Visually and just in terms of getting you excited for a movie, all it really did was to add a little bit more plot detail so that you might understand what the shape of the movie is. But and I would say The Mandalorian, I think this is where we're going to be officially seeing the most, like, damage, hurt, whatever you want to call it, from the fact that The Mandalorian second season ended with a cliffhanger for that show that was then resolved in a few episodes of Boba Fett. And now that Mandalorian's coming back, it feels like this is kind of status quo Mandalorian. Like, they're going to have to do something to get us into this world.
Yeah.
Whereas if the season was starting off and we were going, how are they going to be reunited? That would be a much hookier entree to a new season, I think, for a lot of folks. But yeah, I mean, it looks like The Mandalorian, so I can't really complain too much. But I think Andor has kind of spoiled me for Star Wars shows. We'll see if Mandalorian season 3 can kind of, up the ante on dialogue and character a tiny Grogu sized bit.
Yeah.
Anything from your end, Ronald, that you wanted to mention?
No, not
like
talking
news, trailers, or anything like that.
So tell us, Ronald. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to jump to the next segment, but it sounds like you were about to give us
No.
a maybe.
No. I'm ready to talk about
Ronald,
this.
I just wondered how you found this film. I mean, these required viewing segments, a lot of times it's us pointing out a movie that maybe the others haven't heard of or that hasn't been talked about much. But this film, The Godfather?
Yeah, The Godfather.
Like,
or
what?
God's Father.
First, I thought it was The Dogfather, and I watched like a movie link
okay.
a compilation of Snoop Dogg videos before I realized that
we watched the wrong movie.
Yeah, I know. It was still very good though. No, anyway, yeah. What you kind of talked about this a little bit last time, but I love this choice, and I'm just was really wondering what led.
Oh yeah, sure, man. Like, I think one of the things that has helped me in my life is being incredibly aware of who I am as a person, and one of those things was understanding how influenced I could be as a kid. Like, if I would have watched Scarface as a kid, we wouldn't be talking. I would not be here. I'd be in a different business. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't. I couldn't. When I was a kid, I could not differentiate like those things in my head. You know, I'm like, this is aspiration. This is the dream. And mafia stuff is kind of like that for me. I just kind of knew that I wasn't mentally in a place where I could take them in growing up. Because boy, this is a weird conversation, but a lot of the people that I looked up to growing up were drug dealers. Like, for real, like incredibly well-dressed, cool, that kind of mimicked this stuff. And so, I wanted to wait until I got older. And I didn't know it was going to be 39. But yeah, I dove into these movies kind of with nothing in my periphery besides the pieces that I'd seen, like the joke on every cartoon with the horse in the bed, offer you can't refuse, that kind of stuff. And beyond that, I hadn't seen more than like 5 minutes. The song coming in, the complete black, and then going into that's all I'd seen. Mm-hmm. So I was fresh, man. I didn't. And then the first version I'm seeing is a remastered version that is probably unfair as a first viewing of this movie, because it's like gorgeous. It sounds good. It looks good.
Yeah.
But that's good though. I mean, like I feel
Yeah, I
like
think that's fair.
Right.
That's
yeah,
being very fair to
a
the movie.
But you know what I mean? Like it's
because it deserves that. I think like
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you having your feelings about it, your exposure to it to whatever degree, pop culture, everything like that. But I feel like you being able to experience a movie like that for the first time in the best possible way, especially because like you are that person, and especially amongst us, that's like highest res, highest quality sound. Like you really seek that out.
Mhm.
So I think like in terms of checking boxes, that's like a good thing for you to have been able to secure that kind of experience for yourself, for a first
Yeah.
time watch for sure.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was a part of the trilogy that was released last year. It was completely remastered. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous set of movies. Now, I had a hot take that right off top. I didn't think it was going to be as simple as it was. Like it's a lot it's a lot simpler than I thought it was. I thought it was like this complex underworkings of the. Nah, it was just like relationships and you know betrayal, and I think that I thought that I couldn't tackle this with like I'm like, what would kid me think about this movie? You know what I mean? I'm like, if I were to watch this younger, would I be able to process this stuff? And I think I could, but there's a lot of nuance to it, obviously. But I think that's a credit to the filmmaking. It's just really well told dynamics. Like it's
Sure.
really very clear who betrays who is hiding something, who is hiding their hand. They make it very clear.
Yeah, and in the classic sense of the word, like the script sets things up and pays them off.
Yes.
And I think the interesting thing that you're mentioning, you're right in that it's the linear quality of the story is it's rather simple. I think it's more that it's dense and it's got such like an epic length, and it's like the you kind of have to pay attention. I think that's the way in which it's complicated. You have to pay attention to all those names and catch all those references. But I think you're right. It is told very clearly. And I think that might be it's like, you ever read like a Dickens book or something like that, and then been just thinking while you're reading it, oh yeah, there's a reason why this is a classic book and why he's regarded as a great writer. It's because he can get you to read the next paragraph and the next page and the next chapter. And I think this movie is one of those that, like, even when it's kind of drifting into these little vignettes almost, it keeps you going with this epic scope. So you're right. I kind of had a similar thought, Ronald, of just like outside of a few names, it's not that you have to catch and then remember. It's a pretty linear story. Like, it doesn't do anything too crazy with a timeline or anything like that. It just, the only thing it does is kind of, like I said, jump around. What were your impressions? Like, how much of the story did you feel like you knew when you were watching it? Did you feel like you could predict all the beats, or were you surprised by some of the storylines?
I was surprised. I think I just wasn't, when this opposing force comes into the story, like, it moves at a pace, like it's like a pacing to it. When the opposing force comes into the story, it kicks off in a way that I don't think I was ready for. I'm like, oh God, he dies? Oh, he gets shot? Oh my God. Like, it's a breakneck pace after that. And then it slows down a little bit, and then, it kind of speeds up. One of the more interesting things is, like, I don't think I knew that the Godfather was going to get shot. I don't think I ever knew that. So when it happened, I was outside, and Fredo's just,
I know Fredo's not handling it well. Poor Fredo.
just kind of drops the gun. Like, it's a cool character study just about people.
Was that the biggest surprise for you plot wise, though? The fact that there's like an assassination attempt in the middle of the movie that feels pretty hardcore. Like, you didn't know about the later famous scene of him chasing the grandson around in the backyard garden, then you would be thinking, oh, this must be it for him. This must be how he goes.
They made fun of that on Naked Gun. I feel like there's like spray being sprayed in his face, and he's like, like, but no, man, like, I think as I was watching it, I'm like, I remember this from a parody of this, but I hadn't seen the famous thing. But you're right. I thought it was over. I was like, is this like a dream that he had? Is this a dream in the future? Like, what could have been the garden scene? But yeah, that was crazy. I think how freely people were cheating on their significant others was also like the loosey goosiness of it. Like when Michael goes over to Italy, he's still with his current girl, right? Like he just sees her and is like, "Oh, she's amazing. I like this girl in Italy. I'm just gonna have sex with her here, and then we'll deal with the consequences." But then that tragedy happened there, and so that was also surprising. The exploding car. So they went all the way to Sicily. The fucking rigged the car up. Good.
Or they called back.
Well, yeah.
Like all the families have roots there.
Yeah, but still, but still, I mean, like that is a reaching. That is reaching. Even
I'd say if you saw this season of The White Lotus, they even kind of talk about that.
Really?
You know, that scene. Yeah.
Were you thinking about it a lot, Steve? Because I definitely was. I was thinking about not just that scene, but the commentary of Albie's character when he was like, "This movie's just a fantasy for middle-aged men that want to go back to the days when they could cheat on their wives and not get caught." You know, which you're meant to think that character's kind of oversimplifying it, but it is funny to be thinking that watching this movie. You know, because I don't think this movie is a fantasy, but I do think this movie, that the people who picked up from this movie, that's when this romanticized view of the mob thing kind of grew from it. I think this movie is like attempting to be like Shakespeare. Like Coppola wanted to make like a Shakespearean tragedy almost across this generations of this family and use the the Italian American experience as filtered through the mob. He wanted to use all that as like a big American story. I don't think he wanted to kick off the idea of us like go and look at that. Isn't that the life, you know, of the mob? But I do think most mob stuff that's come since then has like leaned hard on this movie specifically. I think movies, I was watching this movie going, I think movies have leaned hard on this movie. I feel like this is one of those movies that when you watch it, you realize like this defined for us what we think great movies are like. The long, you know, the epic aspect of it, everything about it feels like there were so many movies that were made after this that were like trying to go for that. It's a family saga, it's a generational thing. That's how you make a great film. You know, even the score has like risen to this like god level in terms of like how it's been used and how powerful it is, that sometimes in this movie when it came up, I mean, honestly, I was overwhelmed at moments by that. Just as a film lover, I was overwhelmed by like what this movie is and how it's still in that sense. It holds up, you know. You could hope to make this movie today, but there's nothing about the movie that feels particularly dated in terms of the storytelling techniques.
Well, I mean, another thing that shocked me obviously was the random swipe at black people with the selling drugs in the. So this
stuff makes me cringe so hard, even though it's probably very accurate to these guys.
For sure. This is a layered thing, right? Because like growing up, you know, if the world you know is not anything of extravagance and you come from humble beginnings, these movies are pretty much like the movies that get quoted. People literally have named themselves, musical talents have named themselves after these people who probably would never be in the room with them. It's just like, hey, who is this coming to the door? You know what I mean? Like, it's just that kind of racism that existed. But we as a culture have kind of glamorized it, even knowing these terrible things, quoting things around these quotes, you know, quoting everything but the terrible things that they said about the Black community. And but there is something about it. It's like you kind of respect that people feel the way that they feel, you know. It's just like,
well, I think even more so, like I said, it's just an accurate portrayal of how racist these guys would have been, especially at that time, those days. But I think back to a long time ago on the show when you kind of kicked off a conversation, Ronald, about like period pieces in general, and how when someone makes a period piece, that's just like a guarantee that there's not going to be a lot of black folks enjoying themselves in that movie, you know. And like I hadn't thought about that before you said it. That's like, oh yeah, there is. And since then, and I think around that time I was coming to this realization about historical movies already, where I was like it's almost like torture porn for black people sometimes, how many movies are made about slavery and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of feel like there is this weird wanting to see Black Joy on screen and wanting to see characters that are living their best lives or just having the freedom to do that. It is weird when you say, well, if you're going to set your movie in the 40s, then the attitudes about that are going to be backwards. The thing I thought was funny, Ronald, was that James Caan, when they're at that dinner table, he drops the N-word in the middle of conversation, and then his sister Connie chastises him for talking about business at the table, not for
He just skips over that.
not for being a racist asshole, but for talking about business. But no, you're right. It's like you could almost pluck those little lines out of this movie, though, and it would be maybe there's a couple of other places, but there's not a whole lot of that in this. Like I was almost bracing myself for more of it, you know, and so the fact that it was two isolated moments in the movie, I think made me feel better. But yeah, it still is very like, oh yeah, here we go again. And it's like it's reminding you really shouldn't admire these guys. Maybe you shouldn't be quoting these guys.
Yeah, that's a huge part of my movie watching experience. It's almost like because the only thing I think of, Star Wars, British, like people in space with British accents. It's like I'm imagining something when I watch these movies. Almost every movie that comes on the screen, it's almost like I'm imagining this world that's beyond me that I've never been to, that I don't. So like that's why the like Oscars and stuff make me feel weird, because people are like, you know what, I gave Decision to Leave a try, I gave RRR a try. It's like, but that's what we do all the time. It's like we're always venturing outside of ourselves to imagine a world that we can never. That's every movie that comes out. So the least you could do. Yeah, the least you could do is try our Decision to Leave, or you know, any movie that comes out. King. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, Ron, before we got too far away from the beginning of the movie, you mentioned the kind of pace of the movie. That I was thinking about that a lot, and this time I actually timed it. The wedding scene is 25 minutes long.
That is long as hell.
And like sets up so much though. When that scene ends, there's like all this family shit, all this history stuff, the different people coming to him, the way that Don relates to people. And then I noticed after that, I was just like, okay, I'll look at my watch. The next moment is Tom Hagen going to Hollywood to take care of the Johnny Fontaine stuff with the horse head, right?
Yeah.
Real quick, no one talks about how quiet those guys were sneaking into that room with the horse head, but I guess that's a different conversation. Unless he's a really heavy sleeper, you have to be super quiet to do that.
And it was like between his legs. It wasn't like at the edge of the bed, which really would have made sense because I could sleep through somebody putting something on the edge of the bed. It was like under the sheet.
Yeah, kind of.
He had to shift his legs. It was so overwhelmingly close.
Yeah, but he goes hard, so he probably didn't know.
I was about to say, didn't he go a little? I mean, it's like, couldn't he have toned that down a little bit and maybe had a conversation or two about that? But I thought Robert Duvall was great in those moments where he's just like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm not going to drop his name. Asshole. All right, I'm gone. He likes to know bad news as quickly as possible. But what I was going to say is that whole vignette in Hollywood is like 7 minutes. So it shows you that after 25 minutes of setting everything up, then they go and take care of like a whole plot line in 7 minutes. And then after that, I didn't time it, but you kind of feel that rhythm of like every 10 or 15 minutes, it kind of goes into a different subplot or plot line. And you spend about that much time. I mean, I don't know how long Michael's time in Sicily is. That might be the next biggest like diversion. That's like maybe a 20-minute section of the movie or something. Anyway, I just think it's interesting how with an epic like this, there's not like a plot line usually where bad guys are set up at the beginning and they're kind of dealing with them at the end. But this movie's able to do that just with the threat of this family falling apart and the enemies of the family. And the big thing that's like the hook of the movie is the thing that the Don cares the most about. And it is the tragedy of the movie, I guess, is that Michael Corleone goes from being like a person with hope in his eyes to that, monster that he is at the end of the movie.
Yeah, succumbing to the legacy of his family. Yeah. But yeah, you made a good point, like the wedding scene comment. Like, I think that's kind of a big piece of how the movie is structured, is that like it almost, the way you described it almost feels like it's like those sequences like are taking a moment to set up dominoes, and then the next few are just watching them fall in succession, as plot points or as, and I think that's something that, I mean, this movie, and and as Ronald, you go through, the trilogy, as I'm sure you'll probably step through now that you've kind of seen this. The second one does a lot of that too, and the third definitely, I feel like, gets away from that a lot. But I mean, this one really, you feel that in the pacing of a movie that's just under 3 hours. But I mean, it does it really well because, the time that you got to kind of sit still and sit in that moment, like the wedding or even the time in Sicily. There are a lot of things happening in there that are setting up the next 45 minutes. So it's almost like you feel the acts really kind of accelerating through each piece, which I think it does really well.
Using Michael and his new girlfriend, who isn't a part of the family, to explain the relationships was sneaky and so fucking good. Like, so it's like the best pilots sneakily introduce everybody in a cool way. You know,
because you would do that if you had a new sweetheart at like a family gathering.
Oh yeah,
and you were throwing them into the deep end with your family. You would sit off to the side with them and explain the dynamics. And I like how she was like, that man's talking to himself, and we know he's practicing what he's going to say to the Don. But I love the little observational things that show you how, like, this guy's sitting here. Well, across from him is this. Well, across from them is this, and then. Also at that wedding, we get the most Italian sentence that's ever been spoken on film. This guy comes up and says, "I've got 2 gabagool, a capicola, and 1 prosciutto."
And this one, is that when they start chucking?
Yeah, when they were like chucking sandwiches across.
I mean, it's that meat.
I think those 3 lines, those 3 words though, gabagool, capicola, and prosciutto, that's like about 40% of the dialogue on The Sopranos.
Yeah, it was good, man. It was a really good story. You know what I don't understand? Michael Corleone is a soldier, as a person that went to war, and yet they are talking to him as if violence is like so far from him. Like, he's never held a gun in his life. It is the silliest, weirdest. I mean, because obviously mob violence is mob violence, but wouldn't you think that a soldier would be more like prone to?
I think it's more about him being like the baby of the family and representing what he does, and the kind of fanciness that you saw a little bit of that with Johnny Fontaine, who's not a child, but is like connected almost in that level. When he's coming back, and the Don's like so like excited at the beginning to see him. You can tell it kind of bothers Tom Hagen. And then when Johnny Fontaine gets kind of like, he's like, yeah, be a man, get out of here, and makes fun of him for crying or whatever. You could see Tom Hagen is kind of loving it. He's sitting over on the couch with this little grin on his face. So I think there is like this competitiveness between the kids about, like, outside of Fredo, who seems to be off in his own little world, they're all sort of competing in a strange way. And I think, that's where that teasing Michael comes from. But I think that was especially funny was later when he's walking with Kay, and he says something about how Don is like a senator, or a president, and she says, but senators and presidents don't get people killed. And he says, oh, now who's being naive, and he's like, I just got back from being sent to go be killed essentially by the government. So it's like, I think that they want you to think about that, Ronald, but it is an interesting thing that they missed that point. And then he's got these nerves of steel when it comes to time for him, and that honestly one of the greatest scenes ever. Can't it be? Like the scene in the restaurant with him going to the bathroom, and they set it up, they describe what's going to happen, they tell him what to do like 5 times, and somehow it doesn't lose the suspense, even having seen it before. Just that moment of like, because it's more about Michael, and it's like, is he going to, or are we going to see a change in his face or in his heart, in his eyes, when he jumps in like this. I don't know. Is there anything else, like, who's kind of a standout actor for you in this, Ronald?
James Caan.
Yeah.
Fucking ripping and running on the screen. Marlon Brando. I like
a lot of money in that white powder. That's a good con line that I've always liked.
He dies so beautifully, so gloriously in that fucking movie. Like, it is. Denzel saw that, and then he was like, I'm gonna train in
training day,
I'm gonna do this. Like, it's so fucking epic the way it happens. And then I'm like, he's dead, right? And then he's just like, oh, moving a little more, and then they get down and kick him in the face, and they shoot him again. I'm like, whoa.
The moment where he realizes it's happening,
oh god, man,
is that great moment of just like split second, no time to do anything, but you can see that he's smart enough, like animal intelligence. He can kind of smell out the trap right as it's being sprung.
The booth closed so fast. It's just like,
I thought we were going to see that guy like stick his little head up at the end.
Me too. At the end, right?
I guess we can assume maybe he got because that thing was pretty shot up too.
Yeah, they let that linger for so long. I thought you'd at least see the tip of his head too.
Or you'd
But
see
yeah.
like a little pea coming out the bottom of the booth or something like that. No, I think it's
uh
funny like that. Yeah, I would say that it's fun to watch young James Caan. He's got a great energy in some of his scenes. I do think Al Pacino is
so
amazing in this.
subtle. It's
And I think
subtle.
Marlon Brando, it's easy to sort of poke fun at this performance for all the crazy stuff he does, but he's fucking great in this movie.
He's
Like
so
he
good.
just pulls, you believe that guy, even though it doesn't make sense that he's got like weird cheeks or whatever. It's like
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
his choice.
This
But
is
I
the
just think
choice.
he puts such a spin on that. Almost every line has like this regret and all these years, and he's a complex character, a
Yeah,
simple story, like you said, but like the way that we see the regret, like there's some part of him that wishes he could have been more legitimate or not have. I guess a lot of people when they're close to death, they regret all the harm they've caused, you know. But
yeah,
like that idea that he was not trying to escalate the war at the end,
yeah.
and that he had to die for things to go forward. I think that's, you know, it's an interesting part of the tragedy.
There's
But what an
also
iconic
like
character.
that dynamic that's like I didn't have it with my dad, but I'd say it was more with my grandfather. There's an energy that like granddads I mean, but that also was like how old.
Yeah.
That's about how old my granddad would have been. That's like this hyper machismo thing that's like across generations and cultures that just is like the tug of war for respect from them. You know, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
you lose it one day because you said something that sounded a little too soft to them, and then you gain it back when they hear that you punched some kid on this on the yard, you know, who called you a dummy,
Mm-hmm.
said you stank or something. You know, it's just like that tug of war that I always had with my granddad. That always felt like I was trying to impress him. Uh, that I could see happening in that movie, and I just remember it. It felt so real. It felt so familiar to me.
Here's an interesting question. Who did you feel the sorriest for? There's a lot of people that meet a bad end in this movie. Who did you feel sorriest for?
The women, all the
Oh,
women. Oh my
I was
God,
talking
man.
specifically about people that died, but I guess, yeah,
Oh
you
no,
could say in
man.
general as a group.
Bullets riddle me with bullets, man. Some of the fates that the women had that are living in just a miserable life of like being cheated on and lied to your face, and then the man acted like, what? What are you talking about? You just came from upstairs, sir.
Yeah.
I'm not a fucking idiot. It's
And
like,
even if we're going to help you out by killing the guy who's been abusing you, we're not going to do it in such a way that you are part of it or that we're doing it
no,
really for you. It's more like part of our pride being injured by the fact that you did that. No, you're right. That's a good point. There's one brief moment in the movie when like the men are meeting about something and that women are kind of ushered out and they cut to all the women standing in the kitchen
mm,
for like 10 seconds, and maybe not even that long. And it's such a little snapshot of life, which I think is something Francis Ford Coppola did with this movie. He shot so much stuff that was just the actors around each other in the environment so that he could use it later, almost like documentary coverage, you
oh
know?
wow,
But like that quick shot of the women in the kitchen said so much about like in a different story you might say, well, let's focus on them and find out what they're talking about, but that one image or just a few seconds gives you that idea of they're all over here dealing with all the, you know, keeping the houses running and kind of dealing with the domestic aspect of things in this story, not necessarily in the real world, but in this story we're sort of seeing them as like separate from the bloodshed
yeah,
and the
yeah,
horror.
sure,
And I don't know if this movie's quite doing like a deep examination of what we would today call toxic masculinity, but it is looking at it like it isn't looking at it with admiration. It is
no,
trying to give you like a nuanced portrait of like how these men are kind of stunted
yeah,
in
sure,
their world, you know, even though the story you could argue it could do more to center some female characters.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
What about you, Steve? Was there anybody in particular who you know you wouldn't want to be him?
I mean, well, not so much wouldn't want to. I mean, yeah, I guess not in general, but I think kind of knowing the arc of the trilogy, I think Michael is the character for me.
Yeah.
Just because of what we kind of alluded to earlier, just in terms of, you know, opportunity loss and, you know, chance to be different, chance to break the status quo and kind of not getting to do that. So, you know, kind of seeing where he goes, especially kind of, you know, knowing where the story goes and where, you know, his family and kids and, you know, that whole legacy conversation that was kind of put upon him and change the course of his life. I think that's pretty tragic. And because I think you see it in all the other characters and all the other men and all the other family members, and you see how they meet their end, and to think about the one that could have gotten out of that
Yeah.
and broken that in some way, shape, or form. May not, he doesn't he doesn't die in the movie, but it's just a very sad character.
I mean, in a way, you could say, I mean, if you want it to be poetic, you could say he dies in this movie. You know what I mean?
Sure,
Like, the
yeah.
kind of soul death is
Exactly, the hope, I don't know, that's pretty tragic to me. I mean, any kind of movie, I think all of us have touched on this. Ronald, you kind of said it at the top. Like, I just feel like this movie, kind of created a framework for a lot of story beats. A lot of, like, I don't say cliches, but, like, just a lot of narrative points that so many movie shows have kind of been able to utilize, and some in different creative ways, some just kind of a little more of a copy, I guess, in some ways. But I think um you'd be really kind of challenged to find a lot of this movie that you could say had really been done before. I think it's why it's kind of has the legacy that it has. I think the way it spreads across so many characters, it is an epic, it is a saga. And it manages to do so much. I mean, it has a lot of it spends a lot of time doing it, but again, the efficiency, even at 3 hours, in terms of as simple as the story is, like Ronald said, or as it's kind of easy as it is to follow, I think it speaks more to kind of what it was able to accomplish with the scope of the family, the scope of the legacy, all these characters spinning in, all these plates going in the air. I think it manages to do so much. And I think for me, right in the middle, just kind of spinning around with them and looking at everything, is Michael. And I think it is a really sad thing to see, Michael, yeah, like you said, however poetic you want to be, just kind of die in this movie and be kind of forced into this life that he obviously wanted to kind of break from. And, even in this film, seeing the toll it takes on him and his life and those loved ones around him, that's very sad on its own, and kind of where the story goes forward. It's just as sad. But I don't know. It's yeah. My experience with this film and the trilogy, I also kind of sort of came in perspective late to this. This is one of those things that had always been around, and obviously everybody always talked about The Godfather, but I don't think I actually watched this until I was probably like in my mid-20s or so. Like, I feel like the same thing. I had seen like clips and I had seen chunks of the movies, but it really kind of was at a point, like, I think really after I had just like finished, or maybe it was my early 20s, getting out of college. I just kind of had one of those runs where I was like, I can't not see certain movies that I keep talking about. Even working at the video stores and everything, it was like there was a handful of them that were especially from this era of filmmaking, that I kind of just like binged all three. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I took care of that piece. But yeah, I just recall even then watching this one for the first time, and really kind of, you do really feel it. Like, you really feel the legacy of the film. I feel like you feel it when you watch it. You know what I mean? Of the mob drama, the saga, the family, like the violence. It's all there to experience. And I mean, it's just cause for the feelings that everybody or most people have about this movie and this film series as a whole. So I don't know. Yeah, obviously it's a classic. I love it. And yeah, there's a reason why it's kind of everything that came after it in this genre, and even beyond this genre. So many things are measured against The Godfather.
Right.
And I think justly so, because it is a really, really exceptional thing for film, and as a filmmaker, it's like Coppola really kind of is in that era of filmmaking, with I don't know who you want to include, Spielberg, in the 70s, and Altman, and
Lucas and De Palma
Lucas, De Palma, that whole crew, you know what I mean? and just kind of forging that path and that era of cinema. And this is kind of, this is kind of like at the peak, at the top of the mountains. So,
Well, think about this. This was 72, right?
right.
And then like 75 is Jaws. And then 77 is Star Wars.
Star Wars. Yeah.
So it's a little bit like, imagine if like next year, Ronald, you direct The Godfather, and then a few years after that, Steve directs Jaws, and a few years after that, I do Star Wars, and we're still all just kind of hanging out, giving each other advice. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's like,
it's crazy.
It's an interesting. It's not just that brain trust was like, oh, of course they were kind of like the boys club or whatever of that era that they each had their own way of kind of defining a certain kind of movie for the future. Even though you could argue that Jaws and Star Wars are sort of in the same lane, I don't think they are like genre wise necessarily, but I think that in terms of the type of movie they represent, and Godfather too, the Godfather as well is like a popcorn movie of its own type, because people wanted to see this movie. They did line up to see it. I mean, it was super successful, and like, I don't know, there was just something about this that it's funny to think now that a couple of years later there was a movie called Godfather Part 2. It'd be like, take whatever the big critically acclaimed movie of last year and imagine in a couple of years there's that name Part 2. It feels like such a gamble, and then that it turns out to be one of the best arguments for the sequel being as good or better than the original of all time. And it's right up there next to what else? It's Empire Strikes Back and
Terminator 2.
Aliens. Terminator 2, Aliens. James Cameron is good at that one thing, making sequels that might be better than the original.
That's true.
Even though I don't think that Aliens is better than Alien, I know that there's a case to be made. Anyway, it's an interesting thing, and it's important, I think, to hit one of these movies every now and then that is such a well-known movie, because it's true that there's a lot of huge movies we haven't ever talked about on this show. I just wanted to throw out there too that I feel bad for Fredo in the trilogy. And in this movie, I feel like Tessio, Abe Vigoda's character, his last moments are just very quiet, and he accepts what's happening to him. But it's just sad to picture that, like, you're about to be taken off and killed, and all of your friends have sort of stood around you and been like, yeah, dude, it's your time to go. We know what you did. And the way he says, I always liked you, Mike, like it was nothing personal. That always killed me.
Yeah, it's just to be slowly taken out the past. He wasn't like trying to, you're right. It was so peaceful. He could have tried to spin out of it and run.
Oh, beg for his life or something, but instead he was like, oh, I see what's happening,
Yeah.
I see what's happening.
Damn.
Well, Steve, I think that means you have to follow up The Godfather with your choice.
Yeah, how do I do that?
Throw out something like Garbage Pail Kids, something that just,
Oh, how I love Garbage Pail Kids. No, I've been thinking about this for a bit. Like I've been trying to like use this as a means of seeing some things that I missed either in this last year or recent years, whether it's that COVID time, early days of that or what. But there was a movie that kept popping up on my radar through film Twitter, through some friends recommending it. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's a movie from last year, and it's a movie on Netflix, so it's something that should be easy for those that maybe watch along with us. But a movie came out last year called Athena, that has been on some top 10 lists this year. It's one of the ones that when we were talking about our top 10 lists that I kind of wanted to see, because it's kind of in this same kind of drama, crime, thriller conversation that we're having around The Godfather. Not the same at all, but it's just like there's a lot of conversation around crime, social hierarchy, socioeconomic stuff in this movie. But yeah, I don't know. I just kept seeing it come up.
I did see Athena.
Okay, cool. So
hold your thoughts, Ronald. Don't tip us off.
So yeah, I haven't seen it. I want to see it.
Cover your eyes.
It's what you say?
Ronald was covering his entire face so that we don't see his reaction.
Yeah.
I didn't make my list because of when I like it. It would have made my list, but it was weird because didn't it come out in like 2001? Like it was like 2021. It was like a weird. It's a foreign film that came out in like the end of 2021, but it came out on Netflix in 22, and I don't think I know where to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I just see that it came out in September of 2022. I
Yeah,
don't know like what happened,
yeah,
in France where if it came out somehow in France before that, but I don't know that history.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just it's one of two movies I've been kind of holding for my picks here. And I think the other one actually is on Netflix too, but and also a foreign film. But this is the one that only because we just did those top 10 lists, and I was like, there was like 4 or 5 movies that I didn't see, um, and that I thought the most of the three of us may not have seen. So knowing you saw it, it's still two of us haven't. Because I think the other ones on my list, either you or John or both have already seen of the ones I didn't see last year. But yeah, I don't know. I just heard so much about like just visually,
Watch it loud.
yeah, the look of the movie, the production. Like it's one of those things that just seems like it would be kind of up my alley. And I don't know, the idea of even the trailer looked just pretty incredible. So yeah, I don't know. Athena is on Netflix now. It's I think it's under hour 40, so it's not like a big commitment. If you want to kind of check it out and listen along next week when we talk about it, that's my pick for the next required viewing, Athena.
Cool.
I like this required viewing list. It's going to be fun to look back and just list those movies at some point, because we're getting a nice
Yeah.
spread of different types of movies and
Yeah.
different eras. And yeah, it's always important to remember. I was even thinking about that, about movies that I think we've all seen, but we just didn't get a chance to talk about, that like you can use required viewing just to force a segment on a movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that a recent movie like this, it's good to swing back this way. So
Cool.
looking forward to it.
So let's jump into the next piece. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it, only because it's just starting.
Yeah.
And we can kind of
We didn't get access. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get the special access, but we can kind of watch along and maybe just kind of jump in weekly and kind of give some thoughts, or maybe every couple of weeks kind of jump in and update. But um, one of
We're
the
watching it just like all the dullards out there who are doing this thing
We're
week
just
to
a
week.
common folk right now.
Ugh.
One of HBO's biggest shows, probably of this year. Lots of anticipation, lots of promotion, lots of conversation
Lots.
over the last couple years. For The Last of Us, started this past Sunday on HBO in that Sunday primetime slot. Pedro Pascal, Bella Thorne, Anna Torv that we've seen so far. And obviously, there's been a lot of actors, actresses named that are going to be in the series as it goes forward. I think an interesting conversation point is simply there's like two sections of people watching this show: people who played the game that it's based on, people who haven't. I have not played the game. I know, Ron, you mentioned before. I mean, I knew this already based on who you are and the fact that I know you, that you obviously have played the game. And I know a lot of friends of mine who just kind of, it's basically there's The Last of Us and there's the rest of games that are out there. It's the way some people talk, about this game. And and that's kind of like been in my mind going into this. I've never played it. I know that its reputation, and I knew a little bit about, just, the simple plot of the game. But I don't know. I think it gives a good opportunity because there's always conversation around like adaptations of video games and things like that. But I think this one has something special simply because, you look at the pedigree of the cast that they've got together for this. You look at the idea that Craig Mazin is directing, show running, writing the show along with Neil Druckmann, one of the creators of the game and the sequel of the game and Left Behind. But I think it's kind of an interesting way to look at this property, only because you'll see a lot of the conversations about how it's different from the game. And, or I'm just watching this as a show that looks awesome and I can't compare it to anything. So I don't need to. I can kind of look at it simply as what it is. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious, we can obviously just in general, our overall thoughts of the show, but Ronald, you specifically, not to compare and contrast the two, but just to say, your experience with the game and your initial thoughts, if you want to start it off just a bit, to kind of say what you thought of the pilot, or the first episode. Yeah, for The Last of Us.
Oh, sure. I'm a gamer, lifetime gamer. I used to work in the gaming industry for about 7 years, used to test video games. And so I'd always kind of kept epic storytelling in the back of my head. Metal Gear Solid was the first game that I ever played that was like a story, like emotional stakes, things like that.
Yeah.
In 2013, I bought The Last of Us the year it came out, and it kind of wrecked me. It was like all the things that I knew a video game could be, but then it exceeded it. There were emotional stakes that I had never seen before. There was connections. People died at times that you just weren't expecting. The people that die are kind of devastating. And then that's just the first part of the game. And then you get into the, like, 20 years later when this gentleman has gone through this situation and has to deal with the emotional, guardedness that comes along with it. And this character comes along and changes his whole outlook that he's had for 20 years. I mean, that's a cool, like, if I told you that was in a video game before 2013, you wouldn't think it was possible in a fucking zombie game. And somehow The Last of Us took those elements and made what many consider, like you said, a fucking masterpiece. So much so that people edit just the cutscenes together and you can watch it in the best quality possible on YouTube. So there's a case to be made that you could watch that and knock that out and see how you feel about that.
That's what I've heard. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going to until the shows.
Right.
But I've heard that, like, people talking about that on a few podcasts that I listened to.
Yeah.
Those cuts of the cut scenes from the game or the
Yeah,
games.
for sure. And one last thing I'll say, Sony kind of announced a couple years ago that they were going to start a studio and that would focus on TV and movie based things. First thing that we got from that was the Tom Holland adventure film. God, why can't my brain
Uncharted,
because it wasn't my Uncharted, not my Uncharted. And it just was it was not the best movie, but you saw some promise in it, right? And then The Last of Us came out, and it really, I mean, I'm gonna say this off top, really executed this in a way that almost felt too good. Like, it felt like a fever dream. Like, I felt like if I were to play this video game, go to sleep and have a nightmare about it, and the best nightmare, by the way, it would look like this. It would be like this.
We call those rightmares.
right. Yeah, rightmare. If I was in this rightmare and I was stuck in this dystopian future, it would look like this show. It really takes all the best things about the game. I don't want to compare and contrast, but I'll say all the elements that this game had, it really showed it in the show, and added some elements that I just wasn't expecting, some nuance to some of the characters. I like the daughter a lot more in the show than I did the game. And I mean, and don't get me wrong, I felt the same amount of feelings for, as the story develops, but seeing these three-dimensional characters really added to it. And the chaos that ensues in the first episode. And I just thought it was excellent. It was excellently made. And I'm very curious to see what episode 2 looks like. What'd you guys think?
John?
Well, as a person who has probably Steve's experience, but even less, like I've never really spent much time looking at the game or playing it at all. In fact, I could say none, I guess. I don't know if I've ever been around when people were playing it, but I haven't really looked into it. I have heard constantly about how good it is, though. I mean, it's like there's a lot of games I hear about how good they are. I'm just not a gamer, but I always think, oh, it'd be cool to spend the time to kind of get into that, one day, because I do think that, like you were saying a second ago, Ronald, that it surprises you to hear that this kind of epic storytelling or layered storytelling could happen in a game. But I just have been assuming for years that's what's happening in all these games that people love, because that's what people always talk about is like the storytelling and the writing. And it's like, and I've always believed, like, watching movies and television and loving them, there's this whole other amount of storytelling that I have not been experiencing because I haven't been taking the time to play these games. So I that doesn't surprise me. that the show looks great and is well cast also doesn't surprise me because it's an HBO thing, but it does. I mean, it does look great. The effects are good. The Pedro Pascal's getting to do maybe more than we've seen him do, even in something that's as well liked of a performance as on The Mandalorian. He's going to get to show more humanity in this. I would say I like this show from one episode. I like it. I'm not feeling it yet, but I like it. And I think the not feeling it yet comes from just hearing how epic it is and satisfying it is and how big it is and also how much this captures the game. So I don't know if for some reason it's just not my tempo and I don't know that yet. I'm still on board. Like it hasn't hooked me the way that I was thinking it might. Like I kept thinking there was going to be some element to this that I haven't heard of or that was going to blow me away. But I think what I was realizing was it's just the depth of the world building, and it's I think for people who love the game, it's like you said, Ronald, it's getting to see this faithful and yet still cinematic realization of it. Sci-fi-ish and noirish that was like set in the 60s, I guess, of like a talk show. I thought that scene was really engrossing. After that, it to me, just from an image standpoint, just from like when a bunch of characters are standing around pointing guns at each other, it looked and felt so much like The Walking Dead to me, which is just a show that has a very, no pun intended, but a very deadening tone for me. Like I got bludgeoned by that show and stopped watching it. I don't think this is that show, but I'm saying there's nothing yet outside of maybe the design of some of the creatures, the way the creatures are kind of fungal and the way they explode out of people. I think that's cool and adds a new wrinkle to this kind of thing, and actually reminds me of some of the stuff from Annihilation with like the plant life growing on the wall that's exploding out of the body. So I don't know. I think there's a lot to look forward to and to find out about this property before I have like a firm opinion on it. But I enjoyed the first episode. It did not like become, oh, this is my favorite thing I've watched this week instantly. But I definitely felt like when it ended, it was one of those moments where I'm really intrigued to see them explore the environment that they arrived at the end, which I thought that like the image itself was in keeping with that HBO production value. It was a cool design and cool looking thing. So yeah, I'm on board, even if it hasn't like turned into, that thing that it must be for the people who loved the game and are like, I'm glad, I'm happy for anyone that gets the adaptation that their heart wanted. Like it's so sad when it goes the other way. So,
yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, this won't be the last episode I watch of The Last of Us. Over to you, Steve.
I would actually say I'm probably what you described. You weren't quite yet. I think that like my anticipation and expectations for this were pretty high, and I feel like at least in this first episode they were all pretty much exceeded. Obviously we all love Chernobyl, and I think what Craig Mazin did there, I think is kind of what got him just carte blanche in terms of what his next thing was going to be.
Kind of rewrote his reputation.
Oh my god, yeah, no longer what is it, just the Hangover guy,
like didn't he write some just not another blank movies, or maybe I'm wrong about that?
He could have, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like this series really kind of feels like it has that level of pedigree to me so far, and I think it's the kind of thing that watching one episode and honestly not knowing the characters' names even going into it, I just kind of knew an overall idea what the story was about. It's kind of the thing that immediately has me like hooked on the language, hooked on the characters, who they are, what they do, the QZ and the zones and the fireflies and like, Fedra. And it just did that thing really well for me, at least, where like watching it one time, I came out of it, with a lot of vocabulary for this world that I don't feel like a lot of shows successfully do on one watch, at least for me. And that has a lot to do with just how engaged I was and how like closely I was following the dialogue and like just conversations about what life is like, in 2023, the 20 years later sequence that we kind of spend the majority of the episode in.
Right.
But yeah, just like
did a great job, by the way, with the character of the daughter and how that pans out in the flashback. I thought that was a really, like, not knowing where the character was going to go, that was a really cool way to handle that.
Yeah, and I think that's like, and I think even that is an example, like the way that they use flashbacks. Like sometimes flashbacks just really are kind of a crutch, and ways to kind of like for exposition or whatever. But like, using it like that in that sequence is genuinely like a flashback in that character's mind, and to have this moment of like PTSD and what he's experiencing from what happened to his daughter in that moment towards the end of the episode. But yeah, just kind of decisions like that. I love the opening that you mentioned in 68, like with that talk show conversation around basically what is cordyceps, and the idea of like a fungal infection, and how you know
It exists in nature. I mean, it's a real
yeah.
thing,
And I think the idea of also just kind of talking about like having that conversation about like a viral infection and bacterial infection in a post-pandemic world that we're in now
Yeah.
is not like it's like not hitting you over the head with that again. It's talking about like that kind of stuff is going to happen no matter what. Like viral bacterial things are going to happen. They have happened. Unfortunately, people have died. They have died recently. They will continue in future. Like that stuff will happen. Something that hasn't happened is this, but that's what's concerning, is that in 68 he's talking about global warming and the climate going up, and like you sit here now in 2023, and there's so many things in that sequence that you can relate to, and that are of this time, and it's scary. Like that opening sequence is scary to me.
Yeah, it
But to
is.
know, and to know, what cordyceps is already, and like I remember seeing that video of the ant, whatever, on like Planet Earth, or you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
Kind of being like controlled by this kind of fungal infection. That shit's scary, man. And I think that not knowing even really that's what it was in this game that make these zombie-like creatures, I thought was really cool. And I think, yeah, Ronald mentioned the daughter, like Sarah. I thought that whole sequence was great. I didn't know that was, what is it, Tandy Newton's daughter? Which once I found that out, you
What?
can't unsee
Yeah,
it.
right.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Nico
obviously
Parker is
Nico Parker is her. I forget who her father is.
the hell out
But
of
you put
here.
them next to each other, and you're just like, oh shit! Now I can't not. I told Erin that when we watched it, and she was like, wow, now all I see is her. But yeah, she was great.
She was.
I don't know, man. I just really, really, really loved it. And it's like, I'm like hooked. I'm like looking up stuff and like reading about cordyceps and like just stupid shit that I probably should just wait till next week to watch another episode. But like, it's really got me invested in like, you know, the characters that you meet, even brief ones like, Tommy, the brother, and like, the music, the needle drop at the end, and that the sequence, flashing with the lightning showing outside of the QZ and like what Boston looks like now. And I don't know. Again, not seeing the game. I've heard from friends that I've talked to this week, like there are shots in this that are like straight up from the game, and like just were really cool to see as a experienced, gamer, or like, if you were that person, like, you are, Ronald. But like hearing dialogue from the game and seeing shots from the game, I thought, that was cool to hear from that perspective. But for me, it's again, I feel like HBO's got this thing where like they slot that thing in there, and it's like appointment viewing for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, Aaron watched it with me, talking to people across the board. It obviously was watched by a lot of people. Um, but yeah, man, I'm really excited about this series.
Me too.
I really like Pedro Pascal a lot, and I love like kind of seeing this kind of characterization of him.
Yeah. Me too. It's back to
And
those,
just
some of those, like it's reminding me of him on like Narcos or something, like
yeah,
where he had just a little bit more like life to him. Kind of reminds you of
Yeah.
like an old fashioned like male superstar kind of whatever you want to call that,
Yeah.
yeah. He just looks awesome in the show
Yeah.
too. Like he just has that physicality. He has a look to him. I mean, I know what Pedro Pascal looks like, but the look to the character, especially getting into the 2023 area, where he's the one that just like without hesitation throws a kid in a fire. Like that's where he's at. You know what I mean? Like, and then you have that moment at the end where he's protecting Ellie, and
Yeah.
that just juxtaposition, or that battle in his mind for where he is now versus who he probably really is.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
just so tragically destroyed. Yeah, man,
And it's always
I'm
good to see
excited.
Anna Torv pop up too. She's
Oh,
always
she's
great.
awesome, man.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see her. She's great. And again, like I kind of alluded to it, I kind of, in some of the clips they had in the trailer and things like that, Nick Offerman being in it, and God, what's that guy? Melanie Linsky has a small role in it. The dude from, we were just talking about him with the Welcome to Chippendales from White Lotus season 1.
Yeah.
What's his name? He
Mm.
Murray something. He's in it. Also in some role. I don't know.
Yeah.
I saw his name pop up as something. Murray Bartlett is in the show.
And by the way, Steve, Craig Mazin wrote the ones I was thinking of were Scary Movie 3 and 4 and
Oh
Superhero
wow.
Movie,
Yeah,
which
there you
he
go,
also
man.
directed and produced. Superhero Movie, that is.
Yeah,
Oh,
what a turn, right? What
yeah,
a turn.
I
wow.
know, that's what I mean. Like he was, but I mean, but since then he wrote a couple Hangover movies and Identity
Yeah.
Thief, and he's writing the next Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So I mean, it's like there is definitely like he's already on that trajectory. But I really think it's Chernobyl that made him a guy whose name you would hear attached to a like a high ticket, HBO
Yeah.
show like this, and not do a double take. And I'm not saying that I would have felt that way. I'm just saying I love it when someone, it's kind of like James Gunn coming from, the sort of movies he was making early in his career and then getting to make the kind of movies he does now. It's always interesting when someone, manages to just through success get to be in the conversation. And I do think I'm hopeful that just because I know it's a writer driven show in that way, and they have a map from the games, I am expecting like whatever's good about the first episode to be around, to be consistent, because they have so much material to pull from. Even though for me, the value of taking something and adapting it so closely when it already existed visually, it's just an interesting thing. A fan of a book, to me, it makes a lot of sense why you're like, oh, I kind of want to see this. But if you're already a fan of the game, is it not weird, Ronald? I mean, isn't as good as the show going to be? It's still going to somehow be inferior to the game. Do you know what I mean? Like the experience of playing the game.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
not
because
passive. I just wonder how gamers feel about
it's
like
not.
adaptations that way.
I really do like adaptations of video games, but you're right, man. Like I remember playing these parts. I remember like walking into the apartment when the siren started and the plane is overhead. Like that stuff is all in the game. I mean, they changed it a little bit.
All
I
in the
mean,
game.
like the things happen when he's in the house. But yeah, it's so strange to like it feels like a mind fuck, honestly. Because I'm like, I remember this. I remember how nervous I was in this house calling out for the daughter and like sneaking around and hearing the banging. It's just like it's like intense stuff. And I think that it does feel weird, but I think it's really cool that there's the two audiences that you're talking about. It adds layers. Like
Yeah.
like on one level, like you don't have the bias of the source material, which makes your experience very different than my experience.
Sure.
But also feel like I also haven't played it in a while, and I didn't buy the remaster that came out for PlayStation 5. So like I'm experiencing this again too. It feels like I'm watching Batteries Not Included. It's like one of my favorite movies as a kid. It feels like I'm watching Batteries Not Included, but like in this serious zombie dystopia. Yeah, it's cool.
I would recommend. I know we've mentioned their productions before, but HBO usually has been putting out like a companion podcast for a lot of their flagship shows. And they are doing it for The Last of Us. So I'd recommend if you are watching the show and enjoying it, or just want to kind of learn more about the behind the scenes, the production, all that stuff. Yeah, the HBO official podcast for The Last of Us. Only one episode's out, obviously, but it's awesome. Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann are on the first episode, and it's hosted by the guy, I forget his name, but the guy who voices Joel in the gaming series.
Whoa.
So he's there, and I think over each episode they're gonna have different people from the show on there. But yeah, they were talking on there. What's interesting, that the point you just made, John, and you were talking about Ronald, was like the idea of like the ability to add a lot to the show that the game doesn't have is kind of what allows you to watch the show in a different way, because you're not from the point of view of Sarah or Joel or Ellie or whatever the options that you have in the game, which really it seemed like it was those three. But like the opening sequence, and even talking about them talking about the decision when you go to 2003 and you spend that time with Sarah to learn more of who she is, like you don't get that in the game.
No,
The
no.
game just opens on it happening already. In that, well, I don't think it's 2003 in the game, but whatever year it is in the game, it's like it's immediately her going to the neighbors and that stuff happening.
Yeah.
But in the show, you have time to spend with them as father and daughter. You have time to spend with her doing what she does, going into the city and spending time with the neighbors. And they were talking a lot about that on that podcast. And
Well, she almost feels like she's going to be the lead of the show or the
Yeah.
main
right,
character.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
that's the misdirect of the show for people that don't know the game, is
Mhm.
that you spend this time with this character, and her father, and then you realize, well, her father is actually the who you're going to go with after he's experienced this horrible thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about this fungal pandemic. I'm talking about the other thing that he
Yeah.
experiences.
Right.
But I mean that's the perspective of the show, which is like, I think what is really kind of wowed me a bit. But yeah, I'd recommend that for sure if you like the first episode, even to just kind of catch up. There's awesome conversations about like plans for the show, how this season is Last of Us and Left Behind, and then if they do another season, it would be the Last of Us 2, and like what their plans are, like that kind of stuff, without kind of spoiling anything. They don't really do anything with spoilers beyond talking about the episode. But yeah, Craig Mazin is so interesting. I just really am kind of admire, how articulate he is in terms of what the production and show running is that he's doing for this. And even they talk a lot about Chernobyl. And Chernobyl is kind of what married the two of them together and kind of convinced Druckmann to kind of do this with him
Yeah.
and for HBO. Because at one point it was going to be a movie that Sam Raimi was making, and that kind of
Oh.
went through development hell. And but this is where it ended. And I think they have I think they have something special, and I think it's going to be something that a lot of people really enjoy.
It's so wild that it's so, you kept saying that, but I guess people need to know what that means. The Last of Us is one game.
Yeah.
Left Behind is the DLC, the downloadable content that comes with the game. So like you're getting the like
the 1 and the 1.5.
yeah, you're getting like the extended edition of the video game in a
Right.
TV show, which is crazy to think about.
Right.
Because I remember waiting for I never played Left Behind. I'd only seen clips. But yeah, it's cool because I'm experiencing that part for the first time.
Right.
Which would be really cool because I don't even know that part. I don't even know that.
Yeah,
part.
I mean they're even like they were talking about like peppering stuff into this. Like they mentioned a character Riley, which I guess is a big part of Left Behind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like that kind of stuff really just is intriguing to me. But yeah, I don't know. I loved it. I can't wait for more episodes. And yeah, we'll catch up and check in on it as it runs through the first season. But
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, HBO. So there's that. All right, cool. Is there anything else you guys want to mention that you saw over the last week? I know Ronald, I think you mentioned wanting to throw something out there. Go ahead.
Just one thing. Warner Brothers, during the course of lockdown, was giving movies to us that were supposed to go to the theater. It was an incredible experience. And then as things started to come back, there was a decision to kind of reel it in. You know, what movies would go to the theater?
Yeah.
What movies would stay on HBO Max? And they decided to put one movie in the movies.
A couple, but the first one is this one.
A couple, yeah. But this is the first of them, House Party. Now, by all means, House Party 1, 2, and 3 are some of my favorite movies of all time. They're silly. They're like anybody could watch these movies. They are silly, ridiculous, over the top movies that are very representative of the time they were in. Now, Stephen Glover, co-writer of Atlanta, brother of Donald Glover, wrote this script for a movie that the first half starts off like a regular movie. The second half descends into something that I can only describe as a one-off episode of Atlanta. But in the motion picture doesn't really work quite as well. And I want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you what happened because it's just so over the top. But if you guys are gonna see it, you're gonna see it. So I don't want to.
I don't know. I mean, it's like, are you saying I should see it so that I can see this, or should I not? Because I wasn't planning on seeing it, so I don't know.
Okay. I mean, do you want me to tell you? So LeBron's ring gets stolen from a party that was run by these two kids that are like cleaners. They decide, hey, I'm gonna have a party. They have a party. Okay. LeBron,
is it a house party?
It's a house party at LeBron.
Oh, see, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Just making sure. Yeah,
At
checking
LeBron James's house. Now they figure this out because there's all this stuff around and holograms and things like that. But the villains in the movie that are originally in the other, they're like Full Force, very funny group. These guys are kind of funny. They steal the ring. Now Kid Cudi is at this party, and he's like, "Oh man, they stole the ring. You know who could give you another copy of that ring? The Illuminati. I could take you to an Illuminati party, but I came to this party instead. So if you want to go to the Illuminati party, we can go." They go to the Illuminati party, and while they're praying to this deity, whatever this deity is at the Illuminati party, the actual kid in play, one of them sneezes. Kid sneezes, and in response, the two guys from the movie say, "God bless you." The mention of God makes everybody from the Illuminati turn around and grab them and enter them in a human-on-human death match that involves hammers, saws, swords. Kid Cudi gets killed while defending them.
Did he get cut?
Yeah, he got killed, but they get the ring and actually are able to take it back. That's the second half of the movie. No,
that sounds like somebody saw this is the end.
You know what this is like, Ronald? This is like, remember back in the day, maybe this predates, no, I'm sure this would be the same when you guys were little. Remember the kid in the schoolyard who would be telling you about some fucked up movie they'd seen? And you had no way of seeing it? Like, there was no way to, like,
there's no way.
I'm thinking of a time when, like, there was no way to, like, look up or whatever. And it's like, just hearing about it, and it's like a legend would form. This is the kind of movie that someone would have described to me, and I would have thought that doesn't sound real. Like, they're making this up.
Yeah. Imagine a straightforward story about a party being held at LeBron's house, and then it breaks off into this. So, yeah,
sounds like I don't Space Jam.
Yeah, there's a Space Jam-esque part that happens after that. So, like, it's all that in a script, in one script. So, like,
so what was the motivation, do you think, to put this in theaters? Because it completely like bombed. And
I think the logic was,
and no one knows it exists. I think.
Yeah, I think the logic was that House Party was a huge hit.
Sure,
there is an astronomical amount of celebrities in it, so maybe it would feel like a waste of cameos if they were to just put it on a streaming service. But it would still be let me tell you something weird. Here's something even weirder. If Netflix released it, it'd be a smash hit, because there's something about what Netflix does for you where you're like, oh, this weird movie that I probably wouldn't go see in the theater is available on Netflix. Let me check it out. And you would kind of enjoy the first half of it and even some of the subsequent scenes toward the end, but it was a disaster, man. I don't know if I've ever seen a movie that made me feel like this in a really long time. I was fucking pissed. Illuminati deathmatch. Then Kid Cudi gets stabbed in his. Yeah, man, it was wild.
What?
He gets stabbed in his stomach. Oh, and he like bleeds out, and it wasn't like a funny bleed. It was like this gore. I'm like, what is this? What is this? But it felt like an episode, like a really poorly put together episode of Atlanta. It was even structured kind of like it. You know what I mean? Like that would happen in an episode of Atlanta. Like, how would
you could get somewhere, some of that stuff you could throw into an episode. They wouldn't usually go that like
it wouldn't.
With it.
Yeah, the death match and all that stuff wouldn't happen. But yeah, it would. Yeah, it was strange, man.
I could see them realizing they were in a famous person's house and then just having a lot of fun with all the crazy crap that's in that person's house. You know, like that's the thing that it would be like on Atlanta. They kind of did that already, I guess, with was it Teddy? What was the name of the character? The Michael Jackson.
Oh yes, the Michael Jackson character.
Huh?
Teddy Perkins.
Teddy Perkins.
Hello.
So creepy.
The crazy voice.
And he didn't do another crazy voice like that until he did that Tyler Perry character in the last season, and it was a very similar kind of thing of like just a weird guy.
Just a choice.
Yeah,
Just a choice he
Glover
made.
doing character work.
Yeah. What have you
Well,
guys seen?
I mean, you made me curious about that movie, but I still don't think I'll see it. So thank you for ruining it for me, because there's no.
I had to tell you. I had to tell you it was so weird.
No, it's appreciated.
No, Steve, did you have a moment where you thought he was done telling us how it got wacky, and then there was another couple layers after that? Because it
I heard Illuminati. I thought that was the twist, and then I heard
Death
original
match.
Kid and Play, God, Death Match, Kid Cudi stabbed, ring retrieved, and then another part was Space Jam.
Yeah,
and I was like, okay, off the watch list.
Okay.
I wanted to mention quickly. I watched on Netflix The Pale Blue Eye with
How
Scott
was it?
Cooper's. I actually really liked it. Christian Bale. What's that guy's name from Harry Potter?
Oh, well, we should know his name because he's been great.
Rupert?
No, he was in
he was the guy who was in
Queen's
Buster
Gambit.
Scruggs.
Buster Scruggs. Melton, Henry Melton, Harry Melton,
Henry or Harry Melton.
One of the. I
H.
think it's
Melton.
maybe Harry. Yeah, H. Initials HM.
Yeah. He's the H&M
Yeah,
of H&M.
but yeah, I'd heard like mixed positive on this, but I watched it. I actually really liked it. It's just it's like a mystery. It's this Christian Bale plays this like detective who, where. I forget what academy. It's like a military academy in upstate New York.
It's West Point, isn't it?
Is it West Point? I was going to say that, but I didn't want to sound stupid.
Well, now I did, because if
it's
I'm
okay.
wrong,
It's West Point. John said it. So, something happens at this academy, and he kind of gets called in to help solve this mystery or kind of figure out what's going on, and kind of gets paired up with Edgar Allan Poe, who is a cadet training student at the academy at that time, and they kind of are working together to solve this murder. And I don't know, I kind of liked it. Christian Bale's great, but I kind of think he kind of takes I think in a good way, kind of Melton HM kind of takes the center stage in the movie. I think he's really the kind of standout in the movie. I think he's just he's really good in it.
Yeah, I agree. It's so much so that Christian Bale in his scenes with him, you can almost see like an amusement on his face at what Melton is doing.
He's doing. Yeah.
And like it is allowing him to maybe like tone down his usual sort of, not quite scenery chewing, but like we know Christian Bale likes to go deep into character, and this character is a little bit more reticent. I feel like this movie is perfect. I enjoyed it, but I remember thinking this movie is perfect for what you described. It's that Netflix movie, like looking and seeing, oh, this is a new movie with Christian Bale. I'd seen a trailer for it or something, and I remembered, oh, no, here it is. And I watched it in like 2 sittings. And it was, I enjoyed it. I was curious about it. It had a real story. It had a real ending. It felt like a real movie. But there was a part of me that felt like, yes, this definitely feels more like, even though I love going to the movies and seeing them in a theater, there's a certain category of movie that you're like, you kind of are used to watching at home. And this is that kind of movie where it's like it doesn't feel like it was going to be a blockbuster or it was geared towards any particular audience that was going to push it over, and therefore it seems perfect for this kind of like get to it when you want to, decent quality film that had lots of atmosphere and also lots of small parts, actors that you were like, what, they're in this? I didn't look at a cast list before I saw it, so there were 2 or 3 people that I was really surprised to see were just in the movie at all. So yeah, I guess I kind of second your recommendation on that it was, even if it's not going to wow you, if it sounds good, if you like, I'm a sucker for that particular kind of creepy period piece, and this one is really well shot and nicely paced and looks good. So has anybody seen The Drop that's on Hulu right now, starring Anna Conkle from Pin 15?
I was going to, and we didn't see
15. Is it Pin 15 or
15?
Pin 15.
Penis.
And I guess you're right. It's a 5, not a 3. That would look like an S. So yes,
peeny.
Yeah, right. Yeah, peeny. That's the one. That's the one where someone rubs a penis and a genie comes out.
That's what it was. They didn't pursue that pilot. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone told me that was what was going to happen once, and they tricked me. No, and Jermaine Fowler, I don't know if you know this movie or have seen the trailers from it.
Yeah,
If you know the concept of it, I would say the movie doesn't quite live up to the ultimate cringe implications of its premise, which is that a woman at a wedding for some friends, they're all standing around, and then she drops her friend's baby. And it just starts this whole social thing about like people thinking differently about her, and her significant other is there, and they're trying to have a child. And I feel like the movie, if it had found a way to keep going with that, it would have been like, it would have felt like it fulfilled its premise. Instead, it's really just a bunch of scenes after that of these characters interacting with each other. And it's like, if you look at the cast, it's a great cast of character actors and people who are doing some really funny, fun stuff. The scenes kind of just go from one to the other, though. And I don't know if the movie ever made up its mind whether you're supposed to despise these characters or kind of relate to them for how fucked up they are. But Anna Konkle's very funny. And Jermaine Fowler is pretty good in this. Like, I have not seen him do something that's so overtly comedic, I don't think. And so it was fun to see him kind of fitting in with these other performers in this who are so like Jillian Bell and Aparna and Sherla, who are very funny. Even Joshua Leonard, who people might remember from Blair Witch Project, he co-wrote this, and he's very funny in it. He plays Jillian Bell's husband. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I laughed at a bunch of little things, but I did find myself about halfway in going, oh, this just kind of turned into a movie about this group of friends. Not so much. It does deal with that concept, but it doesn't like, it's not like that social satire you might think from that moment of like, oh, here's something that could change your life, is going from someone who can be trusted to hold a baby to someone who can't be trusted. Like, that's a paranoid thought I think we all have when we're holding someone's baby, even our own baby, but especially someone else's baby, is you're like, if something bad happened to this baby, I would just be the biggest piece of shit. And Anna Konkle's perfect for that because she leans into that awkwardness so much. And she's really kind of, there's some heroic aspects to her performance in this. She does some stuff that will remind you of stuff they did on Pin 15, where it's like, you just have to be into the comedy of it and kind of fearless to do certain things, especially I think if you're a woman. But no, I enjoyed it without really thinking that it fully clicked, and it did at the end make me feel like I'd seen something, but it never really, I guess I'll say it for the third or fourth time, it never really fulfilled the premise, which I think is a brilliant premise, that idea of like, if you drop to someone's baby. And has anyone else been watching Paul T. Goldman, the Peacock series that's directed by Jason Walliner? Maybe you guys should check it out. I don't know. It's an interesting one.
Heard mixed.
It's very much like The Rehearsal meets like, it's got elements of like Curb Your Enthusiasm to it, with the sort of performance that the main guy is giving, but it's basically a guy who's telling his story based on the book he wrote about his life, and they're shooting scenes from it, from the screenplay he wrote based on the book he wrote about his life, and they're mixing those scenes in with a kind of documentary style thing that's following him telling his story. So it's very meta, and that's why I mentioned The Rehearsal, is it really does steer into that Nathan Fielder, like, through the looking glass kind of territory of what exactly are you watching. There's a part in this show where the private investigator that this main guy has hired says of him, and they're a real investigator, it says he's the most exhausting client I've ever had, but he was so nice. And I was like, that's the show. Like, that, if you want to know who this guy is, this Paul T. Goldman, who's actually Paul Finkelman in real life. But like, he is the most exhausting person. Like, he thinks he's being so funny when he's looking at the camera, and half the stuff he says is so cringy because it's him being like, and that's the way it goes. Like, he just said the funniest thing, and you can tell that he's the only one who is on board with this. Right. But it has this meta aspect to it of seeing like decent actors show up to really try to bring life to the story he wrote about his life. And then you have the added thing of every now and then the director, Jason Walliner, will kind of poke at one of the points of Paul's story, and you'll discover that maybe he hasn't been as honest. His book is not as factual as he said. His screenplay is not as factual. So the last episode is I have not seen yet, but I think that's the one where we'll find out, like, is this guy mentally ill and just making this stuff up, or did all this stuff really happen? But it definitely kept me going. Every time I thought, I've seen what this concept can offer, there would be a new little wrinkle. And the guy who directed, Jason Walliner, I think he directed the last Borat film, right? Is that?
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, he's got an eye for that kind of reality bending, sort of quasi documentary style stuff. So if that sounds at all interesting, I would say give an episode of Paul T. Goldman a try on the Peacock.
One last one I want to mention. I was trying to remember what the last thing I watched was, and I wanted to recommend Sick, which is on Peacock right now. I really like this one a lot.
Okay.
I'd heard a lot about this when it premiered at Toronto back in September, the Toronto International Film Festival. This is co-written by Kevin Williamson, and stars Gideon Adlon, who, I mean, she's the first one I recognize. Most people know her from Blockers. The comedy came out a few years ago. But yeah, this is just like a super timely slasher flick, like in the idea of it happening during the early days of the COVID pandemic. They're acknowledging, masks and quarantining and Fauci and, all this idea around, local and state governments forcing quarantine and things like that. But the plot of the movie is simply that, these two friends decide to quarantine at one of their family's like lake house, and they're basically stalked by this slasher killer during quarantine. And it's got a mystery to it. And I thought the reveal was kind of fun and interesting. I think like once it gets to that, especially, it's kind of like I think pretty smart. And 83 minutes long, so it moves real quick and is an easy watch. But yeah, I think Blumhouse had a hand in producing this. And I was kind of surprised because like they put a trailer out like only a few weeks before it came out on Peacock, but I guess they just didn't see a theatrical window for this. But yeah, if you're looking for a fun slasher flick that's a quick watch and have a Peacock subscription or can sign up for a trial, I thought Sick was really fun. And I don't know if you're ready to see a movie like so directly about something that we're still going through, but I think just kind of setting it in that this era right now is kind of creative, and the way they kind of are talking about our motivations, how people approach taking care of themselves and others around them, I think is kind of fun. And especially when you put it in the context of a slasher flick, I think it's a fun watch. But yeah, again, Sick is on Peacock right now. Came out last Friday. Came out Friday the 13th. But yeah, I like that one quite a bit.
I've seen tons of trailers for it, I guess because I've been watching Peacock, but I haven't been really realizing I was watching that much Peacock. But I know, I guess watching Paul T. Goldman, watching 5 episodes of that, I probably saw the trailer for Sick a bunch of times. But definitely it looks fun. The little gag with the woman in the car saying, "Do you have a mask?" when she's like running up to the, it's that scene where the person in the slasher movie runs up to a car, Ronald, like out in the middle of nowhere, and is like knocking on the window, "Let me in," and the woman in the car is like, "Do you have a mask?"
Okay, I'm gonna have to check it out, man.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, let me know what you think of it. I thought it was really fun.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to apologize for the fact that I have had this air purifier on this entire time. So
I realized that I had my heat on and I didn't realize that I had it on.
Okay, well, so there's a little background noise in this episode. We've got that going.
Some humming in it.
Yeah.
No apology needed, John. All right, cool.
I really was apologizing to Ronald. I thought when Ronald was editing, he was going to be like, "What the hell is that noise?"
What the?
But yeah, listeners too. I guess I care. I assume our voices are legible. Even if you got a little background noise, you still got your free podcast, fuckers.
That took a dark turn. So that'll do it. Next week, again, required viewing. Athena is on Netflix if you want to watch along with us. And I'm sure there'll be something else we're talking about then. But movieschmovie.com is the website. If you want to subscribe, check out some past episodes, you can jump on to any of the social media platforms that we have linked there. And if you want to do the video option for the podcast, youtube.com/movieschmoviepodcast. But yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week, or you'll hear us next week. We won't see you. It'd be cool if we could see you, but we'll have to look into that technology, right? But yeah, as always, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Can you?